And we are back with more of the show. Andy here joining me is my longtime friend, co-host, visionary man that I look up to because he's that tall, and who I take my inspiration of my socks from. It is, of course, Dan Barnsdall. How you doing, my friend?
My God, you really need to work on your introductions.
Hey, I got told I was grumpy on the last intro I did. Not to you, but to somebody else. And
Wow.
so, now I'm just trying to, give you the love.
I wouldn't say you're grumpy, my friend. I'd say you're probably maybe just need to do a bit of thinking about your intros before you start a show. But speaking of starting a show, can I just say, because I'm the first to kind of offer critique, but offer a little bit of praise. I really do, because I listen to the majority of the retro chat podcasts on via podcast. That's how I listen to stuff. And I really, really do enjoy your entrance music, your theme music.
Oh, thanks.
I think it's great. I don't know where you got it from. I'm sure it's from somewhere, but it's brilliant. I think it really works for the show as well.
Thank you. Well, it's the hashtag as well. Back in time.
There you go.
There you go.
Cameron, what are we doing anyway? So why find my pen? You tell me what we're doing.
So I thought today I was going to invite you onto the show to do something a bit different. And you can see at the top of the screen, if you're watching on YouTube, to the top right-hand corner, what we're going to be talking about today. Above Dan's head. Yes, above Dan's head. We're not going to be talking about it in its entirety. We're going to be taking an episode and breaking it down, because this episode is going to cause a little bit of controversy because it's one of my personal favorites and Dan hates it.
No, hang on. Whoa. Okay. First of all, let's just give some context to this, okay?
You hate it.
No, I don't hate it. So for those maybe haven't, because you haven't even mentioned it. Yes, we're doing a Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode. Tell your audience what you're doing, Andy. First of all,
I was building up to it. If you'd let me. And
it's the one. And I don't know the series. I'm sure you might know the series and the episode number, but it's Far Beyond the Stars. But yes, I think it's a very interesting show to look at in our current climate, in our current political climate, from a point of view of the Star Trek Deep Space Nine storyline. It's god awful, but the actual political storyline, it's telling, very interesting, and it's also interesting to say it's almost a snapshot of what the 1950s were like. Equally, it's a snapshot of kind of how things were thought about and portrayed back in. I mean, when was this filmed? This must have been early 2000s?
This was filmed back in 1997, 1998, roughly.
There you go. So before the millennium. It's an interesting kind of look back at how we perceived racism.
Yeah.
The Black Lives Matter movement, before it even was a movement we talk about so passionately today, but also how we perceived the 1950s.
Will you stop stealing the ammunition from what I'm about to be talking about for the next God knows how long? That's my argument, damn it. That's my argument. I do want to say before we carry on, welcome to all of the HR Show listeners, the sister podcast to Retro Chat, hrshow.co.uk, if you want to keep up to date with the latest news on HR, L&D, recruitment, because I also host that show, and we're now going to be simulcasting this topic out on there. And if you're sat there as an HR professional going, why the hell am I listening to a show called Retro Chat? It's because of what we're going to be talking about right now. And Dan didn't hit the nail on the head. This show, in my mind, encompasses everything that is wrong or have issues with the state of the world. You talk about racism, you talk about mental health, which is something that is really important to me personally, and to all of us. You talk about well-being, you talk about respect, you talk about women's equality, you talk about women's lib. This episode covers all of it. Now, before we get into that though, Dan, if they wanted to subscribe to the show, what would they do? Do you know?
I'd imagine they go to any of the great platforms you're on, Andy, and click subscribe. And that would be stuff like iTunes, Spotify, Apple Music, and I do not know what the fourth symbol is, so I'll just do those three. But also on YouTube.
We didn't plan this at all, and you can tell.
Those correct.
And if you want to, there we go. And if you want to contact us on social media, what would you do?
Well, you just go to whatever your favorite social media platform is, whether that's Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or Instagram, and just look for Retro Chat Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, Retro Chat Pod on Twitter, and Retro Chat Podcast UK on YouTube. Equally, if you want something much more simple to follow and subscribe across everything, I'm at the MC with Socks. Much more easy to follow, and it's all the same.
Yeah. Okay. If you want Dan's Twitter details, they're underneath his name. I couldn't put them any smaller than that. There we go. Right. So now we've done all the advertising. Let's talk about the good stuff. This is season 6, episode 13. That's about as geeky as I'm going to get in terms of the Star Trek stuff, right? Because we don't really care what season it was or wherever.
No, but can we just again give a bit of context? Again, appreciate we want to talk about the more political sides of it, and as you quite rightly said about the rights and the wrongs, and then the mental health side of it. I think that's equally as important. But just from a point of view of Star Trek lore. Now, listen, to be clear, before I get tweeted or whatever at the MC with Socks. I am not a Trekkie by any stretch of imagination. I enjoy Star Trek. I watched bits of the very original series when I was a very young kid. Grew up a little bit on the Generations show, as in Star Trek Generations. Really like Deep Space Nine, and obviously I've watched Voyager. Well, I may not be a Trekkie, but I have watched a lot of it.
Hang on a minute.
Yeah.
What did you call it? Star Trek Generation? That's the film. You mean Star Trek The Next Generation?
The Next Generation. You know, us non-Trekkies call it Generations, Andy.
Live long and prosper.
So, but what I think is interesting in this is why this episode kind of frustrated me a little bit, is because this is right in the middle of the Dominion War, almost at a kind of pivotal point of the Dominion War, which is the big war within the Star Trek DS9 universe. And all of a sudden, in this episode, they start off, as you would imagine, on Deep Space Nine space station, and all of a sudden we're talking about the war, and then we're going to jump, and we're going to do this hard cut, this jarring jump, and we're going to go straight back in time, in air quotes, and we aren't going to actually cover anything to do with the war. This has no impact on the actual war or the storyline. It's almost okay. We need to fill. Let's fill it.
Okay, I am going to disagree with you right from the offset here, because you are right. The episode opens up with Sisko in his office giving a status report to Kira, doubting how they're doing, talking about the loss of friends, of colleagues, a bit of PTSD, if you will, beginning to come out of Ben Sisko. And here's a bit of trivia. Rick Berman, the former executive producer of Star Trek Next Generation, DS9 and Voyager and Enterprise, originally only wanted the Dominion War to go for 4 episodes. That was it.
Wow.
4 episodes, right? It was Ira Stephen Bear, who was the executive producer of DS9, who went, whoa. You can't do it justice in 4 episodes. It needs to span at least a season. And actually, it ran for just about 2 full seasons at the culmination of season 5. Now, I'm disagreeing with you because of this. That is the setup for this episode. We know that Sisko is beginning to suffer with some sort of PTSD. He's struggling with, was retaking the station the right thing? Is the Dominion War going well? Are we going to win? How many people are we losing? And now he's beginning to retreat back into his mind because he wants somewhere. He's traumatized, right? He's stressed. He's feeling ill. And that's when you see the visions. And the visions are so beautifully done, because the first one you see is an out of makeup Rene Auberjonois, the late great Rene Auberjonois, walking past the office, kind of taking Ben Sisko's attention and looking at him going, what the hell is this? Nobody else can see him. These figments, these characters that he's seeing, no one else can see. They're just in his mind. And then you have the pass out and you wake up in 1950s San Francisco.
Yeah, and then you had several situations where he was jumping, but backwards and forwards between the times with passing out and going back to the current time as it is within DS9, back to the 1950s in San Francisco. For me, and again, I know we're going to talk in more detail about the kind of the more political side, which we'll come on to. Just a couple of notes I made just from watching this was, first of all, Sisko's dad. My God, I hated that character. Absolutely hated that character. He was awful, absolutely awful in it. And the way they almost, and again, from the way it was shot, when in that opening, I think the opening couple of minutes where they are stood talking to each other, it was shot like a wrestling angle. For those who don't know, give us a backstage wrestling interaction between two wrestlers. They don't face each other like you would do in a normal situation, like in a communicative piece. You wouldn't start looking eyeball to eyeball. They kind of stand diagonally off from each other, so you can both see bits of the front of their body. It's like, and it was like that. It's like, my God, I expect them to put a match together very shortly with the way they were going in this discussion. And to be fair, the biggest issue I had with DS9 was Cisco and his family, because the main, I don't know the main actor's name. I generally don't know what his name is, but
David Brooks.
Okay. He's fine. He's okay. I felt it became a little bit wishy-washy with the prophets towards the end and him kind of being this kind of almost the new messiah, so to speak. But his son, he is an awful actor in DS9 and in the 1950s. In fact, in the 1950s, I'd say he was worse. If that was not possible, just absolutely awful. And it really took me out. Some of the more important parts of the show was his acting, which is a shame, because they were trying to hit you over the head in a very kind of clever way about how the race issues that are currently running. I've always been running through this world. How they affect society today, and how the black people in general are perceived back in the 1950s and unfortunately still today in some areas, which is frustrating. And bear in mind, this was recorded, we're saying, just before the millennium. The situation was going on then as well. And now we are in 2021 and we're having the same conversation still.
It's scary, isn't it?
Scary and sad. Sad that as a race, we have not developed. And then we have. I mean, things are better, don't get me wrong, but in other ways, they're still really bad. Really bad. And again, drag it back very briefly back to the Star Trek DS9 storyline. In some ways, the Dominion War was almost like a race issue because it was about slavery as well. Had a big impact on slavery, with the Dominion being slaves and being, if memory serves me correctly, they were held under control by an addiction to a drug. If memory serves me correctly.
Wow.
So it's almost kind of these political echoes through this whole storyline, which does link in quite nicely to it. Again, I get it. I get why you chose the show, but I just thought it was just the wrong time for this kind of show to be released in that Star Trek chronological series, so to speak.
I mean, there were things that came out of the show that I don't know if you're aware of this, but the last scene of the final episode, What We Leave Behind, was intended to be Benny. That was the last scene. Benny. So Ira Bear actually pitched to Rick Berman that the final scene, the last scene that you saw at the end of the final episode in season 7, was an image of Benny, which made it look like it was all in Benny's mind, and this was a story written by Benny Ball.
It was all a dream. Bit
like Dallas, a bit like Lost.
Yes. Yeah, no, but that's a different story. I think you can get into that in many different ways, whether that was a dream or not.
That's not a nightmare if you watched all the seasons. But I mean, for Star Trek, it was completely different, because you're right. It was the first time actually that they broke storytelling in this way. It was the first time that all of the main stars were out of makeup.
Which was weird. First time. Very interesting when you look at it from an interesting point. First of all, I didn't recognize Worf, who plays a black. I think he was a football star, wasn't he? In this, he's like an American baseball player in this. And do you know what? What a handsome chap! I was, you don't judge someone by the makeup they wear in a TV show, but the guy's a looker, and he knows how to dress. Or at least that character, anyway. Fair play to him.
In fairness, you didn't see what socks he was wearing.
No, this is true. Conversely, though, the actor who plays Quark,
Armin Shimmerman.
Yeah, great actor. He's a really good actor. I've seen him in lots of different things. Very versatile. He's no Brad Pitt, is he? Let's put it that way. In or out of makeup.
No, but neither are you.
Well, close second.
Okay. I mean, you got to think this episode had every star in it. It had the recurring villains. It had Mark Allenmeyer. It had Jeffrey Combs, who played Gul Dukat, and Weyoun, the Vorta from the Dominion, and Gul Dukat from Cardassia. It had Armin Shimmerman in it, who plays Quark. It had René Auberjonois, Odo, now playing the bad guy. They've done a role switch here. Odo's a good guy on the show, but in this episode, he's the bad guy. He's the one who's saying...
I felt he was more of a kind of again, a shades of grey character. He was a guy who was clearly being pushed one way by the owner, I think, of the paper or the comic book company. Because they were all working for this comic book.
Invisible Planet.
Writing team. They were writers for this comic book series. And you could say he almost went a bit of a character arc. You could see that he was towing the line, which, to be fair, if you think back to the original DS9, that was Odo. He towed the line with everyone to begin with as the constable of when it was the Cardassian station, I believe, originally. And then when it became the DS9 as we know it now, he towed the line with all of them. And then his kind of morals changed slightly as the series went on. It almost was a similar character arc with this storyline. In the end, he was like on the right side, for want of a better way of putting it.
Kind of.
He never did that full turn. He was always that kind of shades of grey.
He never did the heel to face turn.
Yeah, I was trying to get the wrestling terminology, but that's kind of where you also
you never did that.
Yeah,
but I mean, what's interesting is the fact that the writers of the episode and the producers were all classic sci-fi fans. So Cole Meany, who plays Miles O'Brien in this, was based on Isaac Asimov.
So is that why? Question. This is what I generally wrote down. I appreciate we're going all over the place here, but is that why
this is what we do.
Wandering around with a pair of bongos?
Yes.
I was completely confused why he had bongos in his hands. It made no sense to his character.
And the whole thing about selling his book about robots, that was Asimov.
Right. Okay. Right.
Okay. Armin Shimmerman was based on the writer called Harlan Ellison. And Nana Visitor was based on a legendary Star Trek writer called Dorothy D.C. Fontana, who wrote some of the most classic episodes, including Galileo 7 and The Trouble with Tribbles, the original series. I mean, and this was actually quite good because, again, we're talking about Benny Russell being the principal character here in terms of the racism, but this episode was also dealing with women's equality and the fact that there is a line that Nana Visitor turns around and says, I guess I need to sit out of the photo then as well.
I thought that was really clever that they tied that into that the women's lib, as it was. It was a very interesting way and very subtle way, but it wasn't really subtle, but they didn't hit you over the head. But it was a case of not only do we have this awful issue with racism, but women's sexism is still rife, as I think a lot of women would still say it is today. So it was almost like these dual issues were running side by side, and from the 1950s point of view, obviously neither of us were around then. It's from what we know from history, it sounds like they were quite accurate with what they were portraying.
Absolutely. Now, another little bit of trivia for you, Dan. This wasn't meant to be about Avery Brooks and his character. It was actually supposed to be about Nana Visitor. It was meant to be the female version of it.
So meant to be about Nana is which character?
Nana's played Kira, who is DC Fontana, who we just talked about, the women's lib. So this episode, the original concept wasn't about the racism part. It wasn't about Avery Brooks as Benny Russell. It was about Nana Visitor playing the female writer and what she went through. And then the decision was made to shift it up. Now, part of that decision, you've got to admit, or you've got to believe, was down to Avery Brooks, because Avery Brooks was signed on to direct it. Prolific black actor in his own right, of course, known for Spencer for Hire and Spencer Confidential, was very much about wanting to make it real. And the one thing that a lot of Trekkies say about this episode was it showed Avery Brooks in such a positive light in terms of his acting ability. I do sometimes go, he oversold it to a degree. There was aspects of the character that he overperformed on, and there were aspects of the character where he underperformed on. So I think that's kind of standard with him across the board, though. Within DS9, anyway, I've always kind of thought that he's one of these actors that sometimes
want to say hams it up too much, but kind of it's almost too. There's a lack of subtlety sometimes with it.
Yeah. Well, it's on record that he wasn't happy in the first 3 seasons anyway. He was about to quit. He was about to leave. Now, he only signed on to play Cisco because of the fact he was the first Black American actor to have a lead role in a sci-fi series.
That's interesting. That is interesting.
He was also the first colored actor to be a lead character on Star Trek.
Well, that would make sense. Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting because if you're saying, again, we're talking back in, let's say the late 1990s to 2000 when DS9 was filmed, that kind of side of it, and was released and was I would say fairly popular at the time. I remember it being quite a popular show. Probably not as popular as Star Trek: The Next Generation. There you go, Andy. And that kind of side of it. But I think it was reasonably popular. And they had a black actor as the lead, which was absolutely great. And I remember thinking at the time it was unusual. It felt unusual. It felt different, which was one of the reasons to watch it, which is absolutely wonderful. And you look at other shows at the time, and I know it only comes up in a bit of a tangent, but Friends. Obviously, we just had the huge Friends reunion recently on TV and that kind of side. And that was obviously a hugely successful $1 billion show. That shall have a doubt. It still is successful now. It's still watched by millions of people each and every day, I'll imagine. But there was no Black characters in there on a regular basis. In fact, I would almost go as far as say, looking back at it now, it doesn't age well from a point of view of the characters, and also some of the comments and some of the actual jokes. The reason I say it is my wife was watching a couple of the episodes the other week. And I just kind of walked past and was listening. And actually, there's some quite homophobic comments in there, and obviously it was at the time that was deemed appropriate or / funny. You watch it back now and you think, how is this still allowed to be showed?
Well, even the creators of Friends have said the same thing. They said now they're surprised the show even aired. And, just taking your points there one by one. So let's go back to the colored actor. You are absolutely right. In fact, trying to think about it now, I can only think about one prominent colored actor in the show in the last season, or the season before, the penultimate season, which was season 6.
Yeah, I couldn't comment. I've seen a lot of them, but not. I couldn't tell you.
Well, this is my memory. I can only remember one prominent, and that was an actress, a character by the name of Charlie, who went out with Joey, who also went out with Ross, and I think that was in season 6. But in some of the comments, you are absolutely right. They really cut it to the line. And some points went over there. There was a lot of comments regarding the relationship between Joey and Chandler, and what was happening there, and even Ross to a degree. So it hasn't aged well. You are absolutely right. And it was 1994 that show came out. So you think about it in a couple of years' time, 30 years.
Going back to the comments and what was aired back then, what can't be aired now. What I thought was interesting, the fact that I watched this show on Netflix, as I'm sure you probably did as well.
Yes.
And it's still on the Netflix, and the whole season's on there as well. Some of the language they were using. Now, I know in this episode, it's set in the 1950s, and you want to be accurate to the time, as much as we can be accurate to the time. The proliferation of the use of one word was used a lot in this episode. I won't say it now because I don't think it's kind of even though I will be quoting, I don't think it's right to even use that word. And there were 2 forms of the word they actually used, and I made notes of it actually as I was watching it. And I thought, this is an interesting topic. I mean, you're in HR, but you may well give an interesting spin on this. Is it right for a company, is in a TV show company, to produce a show which is taking us back in time, right? Is set back in the 1950s, where that language was, I won't say accepted, but the norm, especially within white groups, right? Is it right to now use that language in a TV show that's airing nowadays, or should we be not using it at all? To make it historically accurate, you should have it, surely, but that doesn't make it right to view, does it?
No, to make it historically accurate, absolutely, it should be in there. And I think it depends on the type of program you're watching, not to try and do a sitting on the fence answer, but if you're watching a period drama, for example, to suddenly change the use of that word to, oh, that's college gentleman over there, wouldn't quite fit the vernacular that you're trying to get or the story that you're trying to do. So in some ways, yes, I think what I think they got to be careful about is what aired back in the day now is still being watched by our kids, right?
That was what I was thinking. So, yeah.
Yes. My daughter's only 3, so there's no way she's going to sit and watch an episode of Star Trek and understand what it is, unless it's, Star Trek by Peppa Pig. But, I think if you watch like an under 10-year-old and they watch it and they suddenly go to Mummy and Daddy and they say, what does this mean?
That's the question. And that's my point. So then should people like Netflix, Prime, Disney Plus, who've got their own kind of channel now as well, all these kind of streaming networks, should they be responsible for going back through these shows and either removing them or editing them out?
Well, Disney Plus, I will give them credit, have done that. So Disney Plus have now put a warning up on anything that would be deemed to be considered racist, sexist, discriminatory against them. So pretty much anything from 1950 upwards, up until the modern 2000, they've put a warning on. Now, case in point, Dumbo, the cartoon, has had a sensitivity warning put on it.
Really?
Yeah.
It's been years since I've seen Dumbo.
Yeah, it's been years since I watched it, but there's aspects of Dumbo that they put a sensitivity warning on. Now, what Netflix should do, or Prime, because it's also, Paramount Plus in the States, which we know is coming over to the UK, is put some sort of, this show may contain language unsuitable for minors or whatever. The fact they don't, and the fact it goes straight into an autoplay from episode 12, or you can watch it at any point, is a bit of a knock-on effect to Netflix. There is an argument to say it's original broadcast material. Why would we edit it? But there's also a case of saying, if we're trying to stamp out racism, if we're trying to stop things like the George Floyd murders in the States back in 2020, if we're trying to change perception and change attitudes, then broadcasters have got a right and a standard they need to uphold, and that should be removing that.
Then I suppose the other argument is, and again, I'm just throwing cards down the table. This is not my personal thought, but it's also not a common is would one show which uses that N word, and to be fair, they only use the N word as we're talking about once. It used a variation of the N word several other times, but is that one episode of Star Trek DS9, which is buried somewhere on Netflix, going to make a major change or statement to the political climate that we're currently living through?
No, but then why would, if you want to take it to another point, why would WWE, if you want to take it back to a wrestling vernacular, actually cut that comment out from a live pay-per-view event?
Agreed. And you know what? If again, we're trying hard not to talk about wrestling, but if you look at what is the WWE network now, whether it's over here or on Peacock as it is in the States, they have gone through a lot of their back catalogue, especially through what we class as the Attitude Era, which was late 90s, which was more risque. More adult kind of material. And they've gone through and they've edited out any kind of racism, even some of the sexism and the kind of more gratuitous nudity that was there, in air quotes, has been removed from the network. But the argument equally is, as you kind of said there, from a historical point of view, you want to keep it as a historical document that was active at the time. And I kind of like what you said there about having a banner, so to speak, beforehand, saying this may cause offence. Please watch with viewer discretion and all that kind of side of it. I don't personally have an issue having that on there. I'd rather have it accurate to what it was than have it edited myself personally. But then I'm not going to use that kind of language I see there out on the street or in front of people, obviously.
I mean, in fairness to Netflix, they've rated the episode 12. So, when you go onto it, you have the classifications come up in the left-hand corner. It does say it's a 12, which is, unsuitable for children. So they have done a piece there. I think in the bigger scheme of things, you're right. Does it make a difference? No, to the general mindset that everybody are in. But there needs to be some sort of warning on there. But going back to case in point, I think the use of that language in this episode, as much as it may have shocked us at the time that an episode of DS9 that aired at 8 o'clock on CBS in the US, or 6 o'clock here in the UK, or 8 o'clock on Sky One, aired it, that shock factor, what does that mean to the episode? It makes it prominent and it makes it stand out. So the fact that they went there
now,
because
back then, I think in late 99, or let's just throw you 1998, just throw that year out just randomly. I don't believe, unfortunately, I believe that language was used more prevalently on TV and in general public. I mean, listen, I grew up with a black friend. He was a black friend of mine. He lived with me for a period of time. I still class him one of my best friends. I haven't seen him in years, but I still would, walk over, broke glass to the guy if he called me. And I remember being in school, in college, and other people using that term around him. And at the time, again, I've got to be clear on this, at the time, it was not in a derogatory way, even though it is in a derogatory way. Back then, it was not perceived. And I remember him even saying, him not having an issue with it, or at least not stating he had an issue with it anyway. And it's not a term I ever used around him, but other people did. And that's what I mean. It wasn't a shock for me. But on a Friday night, when I watched this show again this past Friday, I was sat there making some notes, watching it, wondering what I signed up for. And then that terminology came out, and I literally stopped. I had a beer in my hand, put my beer down, went, hello. This is something you got a bit more surprising.
Now, you see, this is interesting. And I'll tell you why this is interesting, because, I've watched this episode so many times over the years, that I know the story, I know what happens in the next scene. Don't know the script. I'm not going to go that far, but I know. Yeah. All right. Thanks. But I know what's going to happen. And now I forgot that is said. So when I listen back to the episode, it made no difference to me because I'm used to that. I'm used to that episode happening. I knew what's going to happen. But for someone who hasn't watched it in many a year, to then have that reaction to it,
I've watched the episode once before. I remembered bits of it, so I must have at least seen it once before. But I didn't remember that language. And it was interesting because as the episode started and you kind of got the feel where they were going with the kind of racism angle and that kind of side of it, and the oppression of black people in the 1950s, part of you kind of wondered, would they use that terminology? But then part of my mind was like, this is Star Trek. No, of course they're not going to do something like that. They're not going to be that kind of show. And then when it happened, that's what I said. I was like, wow. And then it happened again. Yeah. And then again. And then they actually used the N word. The proper, the real derogatory word, which we won't use. They used that word, and I was like, wow. I was shocked. And that was one of the things I wanted to bring up with you was, is it right to still have it on TV nowadays? Because it's such a hard question to answer.
There is. I genuinely don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that one. I think different people have different views. I'm an HR person, so I will go down the middle and say we don't. It doesn't need to be there, but in a historical context, it should be. Does it offend me? Yes, it does, because it's not a type of language that I would want to use, nor would I want my daughter to hear it, nor would I want anyone to hear it or use it in context. However, saying that, I'm also a slight hypocrite. Now, the reason I'm saying that is I'll F and jest to the best of them, and you do as well, and we all do when we get together, and
I've got a potty mouth. First minute.
Yeah, I've got a potty mouth. That's me, right? I accept that. That's fine with me. If I go to the pub and my daughter's there, and I hear someone on the next table doing the same thing, I want to go and have a go at them for using that language and my daughter hearing it. So really, I'm a hypocrite, because what I'm saying is what's good for the goose is not good for the gander.
I think as parents, we all are like that, though. I remember being, my son's a lot older. I mean, he's 17 now, so it's a little bit different. But I remember when, similar age as your daughter, I remember thinking I didn't want people using bad language around. I tried my best not to use bad language around. I'm the third to say now, I failed miserably, because I have got a potty mouth. My wife continuously moans at me about it. When I'm on a situation like this, or I'm working a wrestling show, or I'm doing some media interviews, I like to believe I'm pretty polite and pretty straight on the line. But you get me at home, and side note, all I've got to do is bang my head. If I bang my head on something, which I do a lot, because I'm a tall son of a gun, it really hurts, and my mouth just goes, and literally it's great.
It's verbal diarrhea. Yeah, it's verbal diarrhea.
What I would say is I think one of the things that's interesting, I believe, about the I want to say the youth of today, that makes me sound really old, but the generation below us. So your daughter's generation, my son's generation, which is technically the same, and there's a bit of an age gap, but it's the same generation.
Yeah.
I believe they are growing up as different people to what we did. I am generally, I don't think this gets said enough. I'm generally proud of this upcoming generation. I believe they are, and again, I'm talking from what I can experience with my son's friends, obviously my son and like relatives I know. They are generally more open, level-headed, more accepting of people, and more focused on what they want and know what they want and know who they are. So I believe this. I don't think it won't go with a turn of a generation, but racism, sexism, homophobic. I do believe this next generation is going to have a massive impact on stamping it out. I would love to say completely. I really would love to say completely that we will never have this conversation again, or like my son and your daughter wouldn't have this conversation in 30 years' time, for sake of argument. My gut feeling is we probably will always have some form of racism in some form or another. And that's not what I want. Utopia is what everyone's accepted, which is almost what Star Trek is. Star Trek is the going back to what we talked about. Star Trek, as in the Federation, is where everyone's accepted, everyone's neutral, everyone's the same level. And traditionally, the wars or the disagreements that the Federation have had over the years, for whatever series you're in, are with species where they're trying to suppress someone else or trying to be the dominant species or whatever. And that's where it kind of and it's almost like a snapshot of racism again in its own form. But I do believe, going back to what I was saying, I do believe that this next generation upcoming is a completely enlightened generation, more than we ever were and are.
Well, we can only hope. I mean, if you think about when we were kids, I mean, you're a couple of years older than I am. Not much. You're
Don't look it, granted, I know, but yeah.
Yeah, right. So you're a couple of years older than I am. You've hit your 40s. I hit my 40s in a couple of weeks. I know. You think about what we were watching when we grew up, the likes of, a Feeder's Own Pet to a degree, the Likely Lads, the Liver Birds, the Bless Thy House.
It's funny. I think back to my childhood. A very, very quick story to talk about just about difference in generations more than anything else. And going back to my friend who I sort of grew up with from like my mid-teens upwards. We were going out somewhere, doesn't matter where. My mum was, so I was still living at home at the time with my parents, and my nan was round. She's now passed, but this is just so the generation difference. My mate came round to pick me up. I think he was driving at the time, so he picked me up, and my girlfriend at the time was there. And he came into the lounge because he always did. Always kind of spends time with my parents. My parents loved him; they thought he was great. And my nan saw him come in. Now, this may have been the first time my nan had seen him. I honestly can't remember, but I distinctly remember her picking up her handbag as he walked in, putting it behind the sofa where she was sat, and picking up her little dog and pulling her towards him. Now, thankfully, I don't believe he noticed this, or if he did, he didn't mention it. Fast forward to the next morning, I'm there sat having a chat with my mum, and she said I was so embarrassed. She mentioned what happened. I said, don't worry, I don't think he saw it. He didn't mention anything if he did. She said, I must apologise. She said, I must apologise for anything else. After he left, my nan said to my mum, what is Dan hanging around with that black boy for?
Oh, okay.
And I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked because my nan actually half brought me up. But never have I had any conversation with her about race or anything to do with that. But that was what, 2 generations above myself. And that just goes to show what some of the ingrained racism that we are still dealing with, we were dealing with back then, and it's still around today. And it's unfortunate to say that the passing of time has got things better, I do believe, or made more awareness of it, but the actual changes still need to be made. We're still seeing things like that today.
Yeah, I think we've taken one step forward and maybe 2 steps back. If you look at without getting too political, but you look at the Trump era, he kind of went he was a different kettle of fish altogether. And then, of course, you look at George Floyd, and that links us back onto this nicely, and we'll touch on that in a second. I just want to give you a story.
Go on, yeah.
Just before, and this is a generation above me, a generation above us. Now, Strictly and Dancing with Ice, Dancing on Ice, whatever it's called, they've done their first same-sex partnerships.
They do. Now, funny enough, I can come back because I watched Strictly the first time ever last year, and they had two.
It was the boxer.
Yes,
it was two girls. It was the Olympian boxer Nicola and Katja were the first two. And on Dancing on Ice, it was H from Steps and his male partner. Now,
didn't know that.
I remember telling my wife, and I remember telling Becky, and just went, "Oh, they're going to do this," and we both went, "Okay, who cares?" But the uproar that got about, "Oh no, not going to watch the shows this year because of the fact there's two men dancing together or two women dancing together," and that's from people a generation above us. Our generation, or even some of our generation, were like, "It's not right." But what I'm sat here going, "What's the problem? What is the absolute problem?"
Technically, there is no problem. There's always arguments for about same-sex couples doing stuff. People always find an argument not to agree for it, or not. Or there's a reason why shouldn't we do it. Normally, they are the more, excuse my language, bigoted people within our society.
I agree.
It doesn't give anyone a particular advantage in that kind of situation. Dancing with a male or a female, it's with whatever kind of works. I actually, again, listen, I'm not a big Strictly Come Dancing or Dancing on the Stars or Dancing on Ice kind of fan. I watched the last season because my wife wanted to watch it, and we kind of made a Saturday evening, and then we got a couple of friends who went around and watched it with them. And we kind of got into it. I actually was quite interested to see how the dynamic and the voting would work.
Yes.
With the same-sex couples. The reason being is because they have the voting process in and out each and every week on, this is Strictly I'm talking about. What I was frustrated with was actually they didn't show the kind of levels of votes they were getting in order. It was always done in random order. These people are going through. I think it would have been interesting to see how many votes are, because equally, it would not have surprised me if the LGBTQ community also got majorly behind the same-sex, whichever same-sex couple it was, and pushed the voting up. They're a very big political power within our society. They've got a lot of, quite rightly, a lot of say and a lot of pull. And it's a big community, a very close community as well, which I think, to their credit.
Absolutely.
But going back to we've kind of jumped from Star Trek into society in general. Our society as of today is such a mixture of different colors, different races, different sexes, or I should say genders now, as we should call it, different genders. A show like DS9 really highlights to me, when I'm watching it, how far we've still got to go as a group.
I agree.
And you mentioned Donald Trump earlier, which I think, what's interesting about Donald Trump, you're right, he caused, in some ways, more issues with it. But it's amazing. It is amazing how politically and how much there's a swing for him one way or the other. You speak to people, you go around a pub, say 20 people in a pub. I would guarantee you probably find 10 people that think he's absolutely brilliant. 10 people think he's absolutely a pile of dog's crap. It's such a what's the phrase? A pendulum swinging kind of conversation that Donald Trump and what he did.
And the same can be said for Farage, though. I mean, this is not a political conversation, but I was doing my qualification, my CIPD qualification, and I had to go to a rally, and I had to go to a political rally, and it was UKIP were doing one in Weymouth, and I went to it, and I walked out 5 minutes in, because what they were coming out with and the way the audience was around, and this is my hometown, and I actually felt ashamed leaving, seeing my hometown and seeing the way they were. But then I looked around the room and I looked at the demographic that were there, and it's fair to say there was no one our age and younger. It was the Blue Rinse Brigade, or the over 50s or the over 60s.
With that, and again, this is only a very kind of like it's a bit slapdash, but just generally, do you feel then that as the generation above us pass, we're talking about our parents and maybe any grandparents that are still around, which ultimately love them or hate them, your parents are going to pass at some point, people. That's going to, as are you.
Yeah.
But do you feel that maybe when, okay, you're 40, you're as good as 40 now, mate. Sorry. I'm 42. So maybe when we're, what, 70?
62
and you're 60, right? Do you think at that point we will be, as a society, let's just look at the UK for the time being, as a UK society, will we be better off from a point of view of our racism views and our general kind of homophobic societal societal splits? Will we be more accepting, do you think? Or will it swing, will it still carry on as it is? Because people's minds change, don't they, as they get older through experience?
Do you know what? I would love to sit here and go, do you know what? When we look back in time, in 20 years from now, and we do retro chat 650 on our Zimmer frames, and we talk about this conversation, I would love to see it happen. But I don't know if I've got the confidence in that. And I'll tell you the reason why. It's this, even if you look at the last month with Afghanistan, if you look at the pulling out of US and UK troops from Afghan and the Taliban taking over, and now this is, I'm not going to lie, this is a pre-recorded episode. We're releasing this at the beginning part of September. We don't know what's going to happen. We are approaching the anniversary of 9/11. The odds are there's going to be a potential another attack. They've warned that. Biden's warned that in the US. Johnson's warned it over here in the UK. What scares me and what upsets me is hearing the comments about the refugees coming into the UK.
It does seem crazy that we are at this point of mindset. And again, I'm not having the issue. It's like maybe I can't comment, but it always makes me question when people go, "We can't have these people coming over here." Yeah. It's like, but that's what the world is. The world is about people going all over the place. How did America get originally colonized? From us going over there. How did Australia get colonized? All that kind of stuff is people come over. People are they're not stationary. They move. They move around different countries, different cities.
Yeah.
And so what if these people can come over and they're paying their way? What does it matter?
I think the only way it will ever go, and the first part of this will be the removal of some of the areas, associating, let's say, Birmingham with those from Pakistan, or East London with Indians, or do you know what I mean? The minute you remove those connotations and those links between those areas and what people associate with them, you're one step closer. Until that happens, I think that will always be in the mind. And that will be something that we don't even mean to do it, but we'll pass it on to our kids. We won't mean to, but it will come out.
I think it's going to. I'm going to be very careful how I word this, because I don't want this to come out wrong. But I think it's also got to be. You're absolutely right, 100%. Us, our children, and probably our children's children need to be more open-minded, need to be more accepting, need to be, treating everyone equal. Some of the minority is the wrong word, isn't it? Some of the groups that are affected by racism, homophobia, even sexism, also need to be prepared to accept that the group of people that we kind of cover, those white straight males in this case, are accepting you, are making the effort, are saying, yes, we are sorry for what our generations before us have done. We were in the wrong. But it's also, they've got to be an element of accepting as well. So it's a two-way street. They accept that apology. I think there's a lot of kind of inbuilt hatred and fear still within those communities, which is stopping some of it coming in and coming out.
There's inbuilt anger. There's inbuilt anger there, and it'll carry on. And quite rightly. But I think, just adding to what you were saying there, I don't think it should be that we, as segregating ourselves as saying, the white people, the non-colored people, the straight, heterosexual, whatever you want to do, should say we apologize for our past, we apologize for our ancestors. What I think we should be saying is, it's gone. Let's put a line under it. We cannot change what has happened. We can't change what happened back in the 1800s. We can't change what happened in the 1950s. We can't change what happened in the 1960s. What happened in the 1990s. We can't change any of that. What we need to do now as a collective and as a global society is work forward. And that is putting, working to a common goal. And we know if you want to go a different way, climate change is going to impact all of us. So what better way to bring us all together to try and protect the world than climate change, right?
You kind of
put our hatred aside.
You kind of thought that COVID might have done an element of that as well.
Yeah.
COVID affected everyone. Whites, blacks, Asians, gays, straight, bisexuals. Everyone was affected by COVID. There was no one who was
still is.
And still is. That's right. And still is. And it affected every country had an impact from it. You kind of hoped maybe that out of this awful pandemic, this disease that has been running running rampant all over the world, killing people, making people ill, affecting people's quality of lives, that would almost unite the human race. And even in that, we can't, because there's certain countries holding on to stocks, and not giving other stocks to third world countries which need it because they can't afford it. It's like, this is ridiculous.
Even us, even the UK, if you want to put it in that respect, even the UK, we're now talking about our first set of boosters, our third jab, where there's countries in the third world or in the Middle East that haven't had the first jab.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it makes you question us as a race.
It really does.
What can we do? This is, again, keep it a bit sci-fi. Jumping over to a completely sci-fi. There's a famous scene from Aliens, the second Alien film, where she makes a comment. I can't get it right, but it's like they talk about the alien species and how they don't screw each other over for a percentage. They're like, we as a race will quite happily turn on our brothers and sisters. I sound really kind of.
We sound preachy. Yeah, we sound preachy. Hallelujah.
Yeah, but turn on our fellow man or woman over what we perceive something very basic, something very fundamental, which is a cost or a boundary. Yeah. And in reality, what does it matter?
Exactly. And as we begin to wind this back, because I think we could kind of go on this one for hours on end, but let's begin to steer it back. We're almost hitting the hour. There was one scene in this episode there's two scenes. I'm going to touch on them first, and I want to get your thoughts on it. First of all, there was a scene where Ben Sisko is beaten down by the two New York racist cops. And
that was hard to watch.
That was really bad, wasn't it? And bearing in mind that we're watching this in 2021 and what happened last year with George Floyd.
And that's what I meant to get to earlier. I meant just to bring up the same thing you're going to bring up. What should that still be on TV now? Should they still be airing something like that? Because it was pretty close to it, wasn't it? Let's face it.
It was, but I actually think that whilst it is still happening, and I don't think actually what you're saying is right. I don't think it should be pulled from TV. I actually think, how disgraceful is it that in the 21st century, in 2020, in 2021, we are still seeing that type of behavior by law enforcement?
Oh, agreed. Yeah.
And this goes to remind us that it hasn't changed. What's happened back in 1950 is still happening to this day. And it's because of that the downfall of Benny Russell, if you want to look at the character, really kind of expedited itself, really increased. And as we finish this, I want to take you to a bit of script. And for me, I don't know about you, but this is the most powerful speech in the episode. Possibly overacted by Avery Brooks. I don't know. I'm not even going to attempt it. But they're in the office and he's just found out the magazine is not being published for this month. And he's found out because it's my story. The publisher doesn't want to release it because of his story, because it's written by a black man, because it features a black lead actor. And he says, I have no choice, Benny. It's his decision, the publisher's decision to fire him. Well, you can't fire me. I quit. To hell with you and to hell with Stone. Rene Auberjonois' character then responds back, I'm warning you, Benny, if you don't stop this, I'm going to call the police. You go ahead, call them, call anybody you want. They can't do anything to me, not anymore, and nor can any of you. I am a human being, damn it. You can deny me all you want, but you cannot deny Ben Sisko. He exists. That future, that space station, all those people, they exist in here, in my mind. I created it. And every one of you know it. You read it. It's here. You hear what I'm telling you? You can pulp a story, but you cannot destroy an idea. Don't you understand? That's ancient knowledge. You cannot destroy an idea. That future, I created it, and it's real. Don't you understand? It's real. I created it, and it's real. It's real. It was powerful that even just saying it, those words off a computer screen to you still sends goosebumps because it was that powerful.
Yeah. Just sat there re-listening to it, again. I watched this a couple of nights ago myself, and I remember at the time thinking, very powerful. I won't try and compare it to something like the Martin Luther King speech, but it
has been.
It's got that kind of like connotations and that feel to it about, this is me. I'm a human being, damn it. It's as simple as that, and it's real to me. It's real. Yeah. It's real. It's almost like read between the lines. It's almost like the writers saying, racism is real. This is happening. This is happening now, as well as in the future. And maybe that's kind of what this episode is trying to take away from this, that racism was happening then, it's happening now, and there's a potential that it will carry on happening in the future, but the only people who can change that is us.
To quote the line, to boldly go where no one has gone before.
I can't believe you just said that.
I know. I've got to end the show like that, haven't I? Dan, that's it. A very different episode of Retro Chat today. One that we don't normally do, where we go this deep on issues. But when you have an episode like this, where that is the underlying theme, it's very difficult not to. But I think, I've really enjoyed it. I thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been very interesting. It's been an interesting topic to discuss. I really hope for everyone who's listening out there and watching, we have given this the justice it deserves. Yeah. I feel we haven't. I feel you could always do more with it, with this kind of topic conversation. And again, I would wholly recommend that you guys tell us your thoughts and your theories on it. Tweet us at RetroChatPod and let Andy know kind of what you kind of think. Rightly or wrongly, if we say stuff that you think is wrong, please tell us. We would welcome the input.
Yeah, absolutely. And those details are up on screen right now. If you want to contact us on social media, you can do Facebook, Instagram, Retro Chat Podcast, tweet us at Retro Chat Pod, or leave a comment at Retro Chat Podcast UK on YouTube, or even leave us a voicemail if you're listening on Spotify. Now, next time, changing gears, because we're not done with Mr. Barnsdall just yet. Okay.
The next time figures are going to plummet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The next time we are back on air will be next week, where we're going into another Trek episode. This time, not once, we're going twice. Don't worry, not as hard hitting as Far Beyond the Stars. Instead, we're going to be talking assimilation. We're going to be talking the demise of Captain Picard, or was it? The Riker removal. We're going to be talking about Commander Shelby and where she is within Star Trek these days. We are, of course, talking about the Next Generation 2-part episode, The Best of Both Worlds, on record as being possibly the best Borg-centric episode ever.
A little bit of a spoiler, I thought it was great. I hadn't watched it in years, and I actually watched it as a feature film. I've got a lot to say, a lot to talk about there. And again, just to link it back to this episode very, very briefly, just to end off, there is some elements in this because of sexism in this upcoming episode, with the way the Admiral talks about and looks at Commander Shelby.
And also the way Riker treats. And the way Riker treats her as well.
I was like, holy cow, that would not go anywhere nowadays. But no, I won't spoil that. You'll have to get the next.
We'll touch on that. Now, one of the upcoming shows we're also doing in September is WWF One Night Only. Dan, you don't know I'm going to do this yet, but what can you remember? Can you remember anything about World Wrestling Federation One Night Only that took place in 1997 at the NEC on September the 29th?
That was the famous European title match with Shawn Michaels. I do remember that. I've watched it a few times. I didn't get to see it live. I'm not going to tell that I wasn't. I remember I think it was on Sky One.
It was on Sky Sports box office.
That was it. My dad wouldn't let me buy it. So I had to watch it way after the fact. I remember it being the biggest thing I could take away from it was that main event, with how they treated the Bulldog in his hometown. And I know there's lots of theories about why and wherefores that, the smart money you would have thought would have been on, spoiler alert, him winning. He doesn't. He gets completely destroyed by DX. And what struck me as weird on that whole situation was how long it took for the rest of the Hart Foundation to come out to actually do the save in the end. Because the crowd were throwing stuff in the ring. It was getting quite a big show. And I think the undercard for the rest of the matches is pretty dull from what I remember.
Oh, it was dire. It was dire. Yeah. Yes. You're not missing much.
This is the famous one where the Undertaker lost his gear on the way there, and he wrestled in like denim. Or is that Mayhem in Manchester? Maybe
that's Mayhem in Manchester. Yeah, which we will cover at some point. But join us in a couple of weeks' time for One Night Only. Following that, we're going to round off September with the VR Troopers. Trooper Transform.
That was a spin-off of Power. Well, not a spin-off, was a copy, wasn't it? Or maybe I felt it was a copy of Power Rangers, but
you are right. Yeah. It's a carbon copy.
VR was the same, wasn't it? Was that it?
We are VR.
That's it. I do remember that. Yep. I watched it. I did watch it. I remember watching it as a kid.
Only lasted 2 seasons, and you'll find out why when we cover it on the history of the VR Troopers.
Interesting. It's going to be an
interesting show. Thank you for joining me for this week's dual episode of Retro Chat and the HR Show. If you're listening to this and want to know more about what the HR Show is all about, check it out on the website at thehrshow.co.uk or subscribe on all of the main providers and just search for the HR Show podcast and you'll see my ugly mug appear on the episode image. If you see that, click subscribe. I'm in a suit, by the way. Click subscribe and you'll be able to recognize it. I don't wear suits for Retro Chat. I don't need to.
Look. Some of us, I actually, following on from this episode, I saw Bashir, Dr. Bashir was wearing quite a nice little waistcoat. I went, I've got one very similar to that. I'll wear it for this show.
Do you know, I contacted Jason, my former co-host of Two Men, and asked if I could borrow his Trek uniform. Doesn't have it anymore. I was going to come in, for, full Federation gear.
I think you should. I think you should. I think it might update the look of the show. I think every show you should have like a different costume depending on what you're talking about.
Okay, Dan, time for you to go now.
So I think on our next episode, when we do the Borg one, I want you either dressed up as... Yeah, I want you as a Borg. Let's go full Borg.
That's better. I thought you were going to say you want me dressed up as Shelby.
No.
Elizabeth Dennehy. Dan, stay on the line for me for just a minute. That's it for us for this edition of Retro Chat and the HR Show. We will see you very soon. Until then, subscribe to Dan on Twitter at the MC with Socks. You can also follow me at Retro Chat Pod. Stay tuned with all of the upcoming shows on YouTube and on, I've lost where I'm going with this, and podcast as well. You can catch our last episode last week, The Legacy of the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels with Steve Grieve. Yes, Dan is trying to put me off. Subscribe to Dan on Twitter, tweet him, tell him he's awful as being a co-host at the MC with Socks. We will see you very soon. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.